Today we're going to jump back on it with the second half of our top directors list. This is I Have No Title and I Must Podcast, the show we're discussing in all aspects of pop culture. We are your hosts, Tyler
and Chris.
All right, let's jump into this. Up next, we have, this is one from your list specifically, is Michel Gondry.
Oh.
And I'll admit, I've not actually watched any of his films. I'm more familiar with his music video work, with the White Stripes specifically.
Which, that alone, not just the White Stripes, but like just his music videos alone, you could teach a class on like practical effects and weird stuff. Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind? You never saw Eternal Sunshine?
No, I keep meaning to and just never got around to it.
I'd say almost everything except for the not the Science of Sleep, but the Green Hornet, which most of his stuff he writes and directs, except for Human Nature, which I think, was it Charlie Kaufman? Yes, it was Charlie Kaufman, and that was his first major.
Didn't Kaufman also write Sunshine?
He co-wrote it with him.
Okay.
And I don't know where the story came from. I don't know all of behind that, but it based on Kaufman's screenplay, developed from a story by. So I think there was some back and forth, and they spitballed until they came up with this really fun. That's another one that you have to be in a better headspace than you have to be in to watch subtitles. For this one, it will depress people. Don't show this movie to children. Show them the worst horrific, I don't want to say certain types of scenes or films. You could show them nudity and violence in any other film in gratuitous fashion before you show them Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, which doesn't really have either, because the themes in this are so emotionally dark and make you question, all your relationships and your existence and your childhood, to the point where, it leaves you in a dark place. But it's such a beautiful film, and the use of practical effects, which I know you love, is top notch. And was like his second feature film. The Science of Sleep it's got like 4 languages, English primarily, but it's set in France, and the main character is Mexican. So there's Spanish, Mexican, and I think a few other languages thrown in there. A fair amount of subtitles. And this one, Eternal Sunshine is set like in the real world. The Science of Sleep is set in the real world, but a lot of it takes place in his dreams. So there's this extreme surreal nature to his films. He's an auteur that you have to kind of
the one that Heath Ledger was supposed to be the star of?
Oh, are you thinking of that he was, but then they replaced him with like Jude Law and Johnny Depp?
Yeah.
No, that's Dr. Parnassus. The Imaginarium of Dr. Parnassus. Sometimes I have to slow down. No, The Science of Sleep I think it's kind of autobiographical about Michel Gondry. It's just this guy who goes back home. He's been living abroad, goes back home, and is living in this place, and he's kind of like in his 20s and is directionless at this point, because I think either his dad has just died or something. It's kind of catching up with him. And he gets a job at, I think it's a magazine or a newspaper, and he's not really doing what he wants to do. Anyway, I could talk forever about The Science of Sleep. I just have this really strong emotional connection with it. Then Be Kind, Rewind, which is firmly set in America. It's less surreal, but is a movie about making movies, kind of, but not in a Charlie Kaufman way, for those of you who've seen Community. It's got Jack Black and Mos Def. They star in it, and they're 2 goofballs that actually work in a movie rental place in a time when, renting movies at a place is dying, and also they exclusively have VHS.
Yeah.
Now, this was made in 2008, which you're thinking, like, if it was 20 years ago, that wouldn't be so bad. But even 2008, that was already out of date. So it's a small community of older people that do still have VCRs and want to rent these movies. But a bunch of crazy things happen. And it's got kind of a bittersweet, somber ending. But it's a lovely film also. For anybody who's seen it, like, it's fun. Then he made The Green Hornet, the one film in all of his filmography that he didn't have, well, except for Human Nature, that he didn't have something, which Charlie Kaufman's a great writer and comes up with these really great, weird, surreal stories that don't make any sense in the real world, but need a weird mind to bring him to life like his own or Michelle. The Green Hornet was like his money. He needed some money. I think it was he was doing the opposite of like what he normally does. Like, I want to go into Hollywood and do something comic booky, but if you watch this, you wouldn't even know that it was him directing it. It just looks like any other generic big blockbuster movie that I think Seth Rogen had too much creative control on. I don't hate Seth Rogen when he's good at what he is doing in a certain type of thing, and usually not as the main character. He can add something comedic to something. There was a time there where there was like a few films that he made that worked for what they were. Judd Apatow and some other things. The Green Hornet wasn't one of them. That was kind of a big letdown because I think it's a really good property or idea from like the old silent, not silent, it was only audio. The opposite of silent. The old radio shows, and which went on, there were comic books and TV show that ran at the same time as the 60s Batman. They even had a crossover episode. So that sucks. He's another one that it's kind of hard to, like, his latter, I think, 4 most recent films were all subtitled. They're all either, I think they're all French. And they keep getting weirder. And like, not like with David Lynch. It's like the thing that's happening is kind of incoherent. But how people are reacting to it is in like like this is normal. Like, they're not living in the real world. Or maybe this thing is happening in their imagination and the world is normal. You're just kind of seeing through childlike wonder. It's hard to say. And again, like Lynch, it's not for everybody, but I'd recommend at least checking out The Science of Sleep. And if you need to cry or question your own existence, that Jim Carrey one, which for some reason I've already forgotten because
Eternal
I'm tired.
Sunshine.
Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. And Be Kind Rewind. I think anybody'd love Be Kind Rewind. I think it's a nice film. I think it's like a nice indie film that feels like it fit into a time in America when there were a lot of indie films being made, and he made a really good one. And then you get to find out what sweeting a movie is. Let's move on.
Up next, we have one from my list, John Carpenter.
Interesting.
This is one of those that could be arguable whether it's subjective or objective, because a lot of Carpenter's movies were at least box office flops, but have become cult classics in their own right. Because the greatest movie ever made, Big Trouble in Little China, everybody knows that. But I think his movies are just fun. They got a certain feel to them, and it's one of those that the reason a lot of his movies failed at the time is because he was taking steps outside of what the norm is to make a piece of art. Because I know specifically with The Thing, a lot of the criticism was with the dialogue and like the characters not looking at the camera. Like, oh, why aren't they looking at the camera? Why aren't they doing this? Why is their backs to us? Because in the real world, if you've been with the same group of people for months on end in a cramped space, you're going to fall into certain routines. You're not going to like set and face each other certain ways. You're going to go about your business. You're going to do that. And it lends a more realistic thing that people weren't used to seeing. That, and he released The Thing right next to E.T., but cost him a lot. Pretty lucrative deal with Universal, I think. But again, his movies are just fun, especially with They Live. You got Roddy Piper in there.
Yeah, what a crazy choice.
Yeah.
To make this movie with. That's like extreme political satire, but it's so well remembered and beloved. I don't know how it was received at the time.
I'm probably the same with most things because, you know, I'm trying to say, like, the Thing was a flop. I think Big Trouble in Little China was kind of not well.
Yeah, it was. I just happened to click on that. Its budget was $25 million at max, and it made $11 million. So, but I remember seeing that on TV and loving it when I was a kid. It's crazy. I
know John Carpenter is actually like a big inspiration to some very popular video games because like the Metal Gear Solid series, Hideo Kojima was a huge fan of just cinema in general. And so the character of Solid Snake was actually fashioned after Snake Plissken in Escape from New York. Like, cause I think of obviously the code name of Snake, one of the characters has the eye patch. And I think at one point he also went by the code name of Pliskin, or someone did in the game. So yeah, heavily borrowed from those movies. And of course, Halloween, classic slasher for a lot of people. And John Carpenter did the music for a lot of his own movies too.
Yeah, that's what I'm seeing. I did not realize that.
Yeah, because I think he only directed the first Halloween movie, and I think he begrudgingly wrote the script for the second Halloween movie. But even to this day, all the Halloween movies he's credited on because they still use his music.
Right.
But so I think like even in the 90s, his movies kind of dipped off, with I think the most popular being Vampires, which me and Sarah watched that one recently. That's just a fun ride. You can tell there's certain editing mistakes where you can definitely tell there's props in there. But I think Sarah just loved the dialogue with James Woods, which I think he improvised a lot of it.
And that was Vampires.
Yeah. Yeah, just go watch some of his movies. Don't listen to critics. They're wrong. What do we got next?
Who do we have next?
Another one from your list, and would have been an honorable mention on mine, but Charlie Chaplin. Going old school.
Extremely old to the silent film era. So he made like 1 million short films, which was what you did at the time. And he created a character, the Tramp, which he had been doing on like vaudeville type stages, and carried over into making these little short films as this character. And that just became the through line of his like 95% of his career. And not that he ever strayed from it. It was only at the end of his career he started to let go of it. And another auteur, I would dare say, because he produced, directed, wrote, acted in, and did the music for all of his stuff.
Yeah.
And it's another one that I would get. There's not as many films on here. I mean, unless you also include the short films. I wouldn't necessarily do that, but you could write an entire series of podcasts based around this.
Just love seeing like the behind the scenes stuff of his movies.
You thinking about that skating scene from I think it's Modern Times. They're genuinely, if you think about, I don't know, this newest generation completely befuddles me and confounds me. I don't know why and what they think is actually funny anymore. If it's that they actually think something's funny, or if they're just laughing to fit in. Maybe I'm just, maybe society passed me by. But when I started watching these about 10 years ago, I thought, well, I just want to watch it for the historical representation in my film knowledge. And then it's still legit funny. Like, there's a lot of this it's actually just well thought out, humorous scenarios, and works. And it works to today. Like, it's kind of, and because there's no, especially in the silence, there's no dialogue. And he tried to hold on to doing silent films for longer than he needed to. Like Modern Times, by Modern Times, they do incorporate some sound into it that is dialogue. It's like he goes to use the restroom in this kind of, it's almost like futuristic. I mean, not almost, it definitely is. There's like this huge TV screen that comes on in the bathroom of like the boss telling him to get back to work. And I know that like most of our audience is probably not going to have seen this film and think like, that sounds like 1984.
Yeah.
That's what he was trying to depict. He was a bit ahead of his time. That's why the movie is called Modern Times. I think most people are going to remember that they will have seen a clip, or somebody will have written the transcript out from one of the final scenes from The Great Dictator, the speech that he gives. City Lights is about, I mean, the Tramp is basically like this homeless person who just kind of barely scrapes by. In that, he falls in love with this woman who's blind, and he can't really provide for her. And it's kind of sad. But there's a lot of, like, any of these films, especially the features, they go in some wild directions, and he gets into some crazy scenarios, which is what it was meant. Film was at the time meant to be escapism. And then it wasn't until The Great Dictator he was still basically playing that same character, and that was his first like full-on speaking role. And then he did only a few films after that, and again he directed all of his own films. And for his earliest films that he didn't do, I can't remember how many there were, but there were even a few of the short ones that he wanted to go back and redo the music for later on. He re-recorded the music for, so there's versions out there that are not his original soundtrack, and then there are versions that have his soundtrack on them you could probably get a hold of. And I mean, even then, back when it was the silent film era, you never know what kind of... Sometimes you go into a place and it would just have a live keyboardist playing something for it. I'm no expert on what it was like during that era. If each film had like... I think sometimes it had to just be whatever they felt like playing. If you've ever met a piano player, they're temperamental people, vicious wolverines, if you will, that do whatever they want at will. They're harder to work with than drummers. So, anyway, I think I've said all I can say about Charlie Chaplin.
Well, I got one more thing. I don't know if this is as well known, but he actually helped advocate the rights for child actors. And I think his movie, was it The Kid?
Yeah.
Actually brought on the first child actor. And that kid, whose name I can't remember.
Jackie Coogan.
Yep. Went on to play Uncle Fester in the original Addams Family. But while Coogan was working, his parents spent all of his money. So by the time he turned 18, he had no money, even though I think he had amassed like millions of dollars. And so Charlie Chaplin actually paid all of his legal fees to take his parents to court, and he won. And that is why we now have laws in effect for child actors, which I thought was pretty interesting.
He ended up in court a lot.
Yeah. Let's see who's next. Another one from both of our lists, and one we have talked about before, Wes Anderson. Did a whole episode about Wes Anderson. So maybe brief, maybe not for this. Go watch that episode. But Wes Anderson, another auteur, brought in very unique style, especially once you get past Tenenbaum era.
Yeah. The Royal Tenenbaums is my girlfriend's favorite film of his. When he was a bit looser, like his filmmaking has gotten more and more rigid over time, especially the way he composes a shot. The thing I said about Asteroid City, I didn't think he could get more Wes Andersonian after The French Dispatch than he did with Asteroid City, but he did. And I only recently finished the Henry Sugar and the 3 more like short films that he made based on Roald Dahl's work. But and those were interesting. I think that extreme rigid filmmaking style that he's been employing lately is better used in short films. I feel like he does. Looking at the list in total now on this side of things, because I kind of got a bit obsessed with Asteroid City at the time. Being removed from it, I don't feel differently about that specific film. But I don't want to see this list on the other side with like 15 more movies and have them be, 15 more films that are more rigid than Asteroid City. I think he has to hit a breaking point and at some point completely loosen up and shoot something more akin to Rushmore, Bottle Rocket, or the Royal Tenenbaums, lest he gets swallowed up in himself. We did do a pretty deep dive on his work, right?
Yeah.
Already. So yeah, he was on both of our lists.
Yes.
He was one I forgot on my list until I went back and I was like, oh, and had to go add him back in. So before I sent it to you, but when I was trying to complete my list, I was like, who else? Oh no, I forgot Wes Anderson. How could I do that? I don't know how I did.
It's like, again, talking about like how we gravitate toward our tours. I think that's why he's on my list. It's just because it is a cohesive thought, if nothing else, and it's different. You can go
original movies, original ideas that we're not getting much of now.
Because you can go watch like any blockbuster movie and they all feel the same. Then you see one of his movies and you're like, oh, this is different.
Yeah. Why the is the color grading like that? I don't know, but at least it's not the exact same as it is in every other CGI explosion. I know I sound like I'm getting old, and I sound like the guys who were complaining about films to me when I was in my 20s, but I can tell you this, it's getting boring out there, and I don't go to the movies as often as I used to because there's not as much that's interesting that I want to see.
For me, it's quality versus price. The price has gone up, the quality has gone down.
Yeah.
Because it's like, why am I going to go spend all my money at the theater when I can just wait a couple months and watch it.
And still be disappointed.
Yeah, without risk. Because it's like, oh, if I don't like it, I just turn it off and that's the end of it.
Yeah.
It's like I didn't lose any money.
But having said that, I do look forward to Wes Anderson's new films. Their original works, and even if I have conflicted feelings about him, there's something compelling about him, and the same as I've felt about Michel Gondry and several others on my list. Oh, David Lynch as well. Anytime I hear about a new project or something, which I think COVID kind of shook up everybody. It either forced them into thinking, what can I get done in this time of crisis in as safe a way as possible, or I think it sent some people spiraling into a depression. I think Everything Everywhere All at Once was already, like, they were ready to do it by then. It wasn't made because of COVID. I think we're probably still going to have some works in the next few years that are going to have had their origins during 2020, 2021. And they're going to be self-reflective and probably a bit darker, a little bit more. I don't want to say depressing. I hate when people do that. But I think it's going to be melancholic. And I'm not saying specifically from Wes Anderson. I'm just saying that time, I think, is not done with us yet.
Yeah.
That time that we spent in constant panic and fear and worry. And if you weren't panic, feared, or afraid or worried, everyone around you was, and it had an effect on you whether you realized it or not, whether you were afraid of getting sick or not. So there are still going to be projects in the future that are going to have been affected directly by that. What we're seeing now still, is Everything Everywhere All at Once is so recent, and Asteroid City were kind of being made still with those protocols, it's still kind of like threw it into the aftermath of it. And I know there's got to at least be one person thinking, we're still in it. We're not in the worst of it, but it is still a thing. It is still happening. We still have spikes. You have to be digging in the news articles to find them. But it is still a thing. People are still getting sick from this virus. So anyway, Wes Anderson.
Yeah, for a deeper look on what we think of Wes Anderson, go watch that episode.
Yes, and like, share, and subscribe.
Always good. Another one from our joint list, Edgar Wright. I just love the way his movies flow.
Yes, so when I think about shooting something, I really think about three things, but three different aspects of the three directors that would have had the most influence on me from a cinematic standpoint. It's David Lynch, Michel Gondry, and Edgar Wright. And Edgar Wright, it's his pacing and flow.
Yeah.
Nobody else does it like him. And if they do, they're copying him, which is what I hope to do.
Yeah, especially with his Three Flavors Cornetto trilogy. Mm-hmm. Just like each edit is a joke in itself.
Yeah.
And
it's so frenetic, and there's so much like energy to that. Even in a boring scene, he can make tying your shoelaces seem exciting in context with other things happening. It's a joke in the middle of everything that you'd be doing, getting ready to have a boss battle, that you'd need to tie your shoes, but you would need to tie your shoes. That's from Scott Pilgrim.
There is a YouTube channel. I think it's dead now, but the creator has left it up for everyone to enjoy still. It's called Every Frame a Painting.
Oh, I loved his work.
Yeah. And he specifically talks about Edgar Wright's editing style in one of his videos, and like how it is so different from a lot of other movies. And one of the examples he gave was, in American comedy, if someone didn't drink, you would just have like an offhand joke from one of the characters, just being like, oh, you don't drink? What's up with that? But in World's End, you get the edit shot of everyone filling up beers and then one glass of water. And it's not saying it's like better or worse necessarily, but it's nice to have the change up and to have something that is more thought out than like an offhand throwaway line. And again, talking about with Scorsese, Edgar Wright edits on beats, so it's almost like music. And we especially see that in Baby Driver, where music is the focus. And just the pacing, the flow is just fantastic.
He also did his first documentary, maybe not his last documentary, who can say, the Sparks Brothers, about Sparks the band. I thought this was like Anvil. Like, is this fictional band that he's created to do like a mockumentary about. So knowing that and this is right off of Baby Driver. So, well, not right off of Baby Driver, it was several years later, but Baby Driver was his last feature film, and I was really looking forward to his next work. So went to go see the Sparks Brothers in that theater. It was me and my girlfriend, just us. That was it. And it's long. It's like longer than you'd think at 140 minutes. So I don't know if I knew how long it was going to be. I had to have looked at some point. The Sparks Brothers, they're still going. They've had I think they started in like the early 70s, maybe late 60s. They're still going. It's two brothers. I won't get into this. If You Love Me, they're real. It's a real band. That's the thing I found out, is like, how is it that they've been so influential and stayed like just under the radar from most people, unless you're like in the know? It's crazy when that happens, but it has, and had been like such an influence. Like, a lot of people are like, oh, I like this band or that band, I want this sound or whatever, whereas like the Sparks Brothers did it first. Anyway, I won't get too into Sparks, but yeah, Shaun of the Dead, Hot Fuzz, and rounded out by At World's End, he did Scott Pilgrim in the middle there, and was a writer on Tintin, which I loved too. That was kind of a weird thing. It's a great little film. I was looking forward to the next one. I don't know if that's ever going to happen. And something also, his most recent film, Last Night in Soho, which was like him
a thriller.
Really, yeah, going into horror, did a great job with that. But something I want to touch on real quick was Ant-Man, which is why I was so glad that you mentioned his pacing and how that can be used to create energy. The script, he's still listed as like a producer and a writer on it. Like, they pretty much did, like, they used his original story and just changed some things, and he was going to direct it. If he had directed it, I feel like we would have had a trilogy of Ant-Man movies, and they would have been good.
Yeah, for sure.
They were looking at it, and yet again, I think it looked too much of an outlier, because it didn't look exactly the same as all the rest of the Marvel movies that have come out. And don't get me wrong, I am a big fan of some of those movies. I can like high art, weird, surreal films, and I can like these blockbuster things.
Yeah, sometimes you just need to turn your brain off.
So they didn't want to make an Edgar Wright film. He remained on the project. I mean, I don't know if he completely left the project and they just used some of his stuff and just left his name on there as an executive producer. I wasn't behind these closed doors. Maybe after that point he was just gone. Maybe he was still kind of connected to it. I don't think so. But that's the thing, is they couldn't see a final cut. They didn't know what it was going to be to the end. I don't know if any of them had ever seen any of these other movies, though, but there's where the energy is. There's where the comedy is. They wanted to add more fighting in, and I'm like, no, there would have been... I'd never read his original script, but I have to trust that it would have been enough, that the pacing in it, you would have felt that energy throughout. You would have felt it through the comedy through visuals and storytelling, through what he does, which is, using the media of film to tell the story, move it forward, and also be entertaining at the same time with that level of pacing and energy. And they didn't have the imagination to trust him or know that it's gonna be there in the end. It's gonna feel fast-paced all the way through when it needs to be. Not just like breakneck speed all the way through, but when it needs to be. Just like Baby Driver, it's about this guy who drives real fast. But there are slow moments too, where him and his girlfriend are just listening to music in a laundromat.
Yeah. Same with Hot Fuzz. Some of the times when they slow it down is part of the joke. Because it's like, you got action, action, action. We're following a duck around.
Right. Yeah, or with the shoelaces in Scott
Yeah.
Pilgrim when he's, getting ready and like putting on his clothes, and then it's super fast and there's that pull in with the camera, the zoom, and then tying the shoelaces and the other, and he does it extremely slowly, like he has to take time to remember how to tie his shoelaces, and then boom, we're off. I think it's really sad. It could have really let Marvel know you can let in some auteurs once in a while and have some outlier films. They don't all have to look the same. They don't all have to sound the same. They don't all have to be the same. You can have some really good... I think they're starting to get that.
Yeah.
But I haven't really seen evidence of that yet. We'll see.
As long as you've got the singular direction, you can have the offshoots that diverge back into the fold.
Yeah. I don't see why, like now... Like Deadpool, they're gonna let Deadpool be part of the MCU, and it's gonna be R-rated, and it's gonna be weird and fourth wall breaky. So maybe they're getting that. Whereas we're probably always still gonna have something that looks like, not to say that I have disliked the Captain America films, but the look of them, people would say is drab. We'll see when they do the Fantastic Four. I hear is gonna be pretty weird, and we'll see what they do with X-Men.
Yeah, but I don't think this is the last we'll talk about Edgar Wright, but for now we'll move on to Coen brothers, Joel and Ethan.
This was one on my honorable mentions list that very nearly made it to my regular list. I was swapping some names back and forth, and I knew that it would be on your list, and that's kind of why I left it off, because I knew it'd be represented.
Yeah, because they do dark comedy so well. Just like Fargo, like anytime something bad happens now, I feel like I'm quoting Fargo because they're just so matter of fact. It's like, what do we got here? Double homicide. Oh, yeah? Oh, that's not good now. But, and like, did you know anybody that didn't quote Oh Brother, Where Art Thou when it came out?
I know people who still do.
Yeah.
We live in Kentucky.
Yeah.
Come on.
And The Big Lebowski, that's taken on a life of its own. Even though, me personally, I think that's not their greatest film, but you still got to mention it.
All right, I'm looking at them. What is their greatest film?
Personally, I think No Country for Old Men.
Oh, yeah.
But
it's weird to think that that's the same.
Yeah.
That's yet again, like, they haven't... So they also did the remake of True Grit, a Western. Like, what has essentially become what was, like, one of the most popular genres in, like, the 40s, 50s, and 60s, even into the 70s. Now is essentially, like, I don't want to call it a dead genre, but it's so niche.
Yeah.
That, like, when somebody does make a Western, it's like, oh my god, this is gonna get every Oscar because it's a Western.
And I know someone might argue with me because John Wayne, I think, was in the original True Grit. Jeff Bridges in this remake, fantastic job. So I think as far as remakes go, that was a good one.
I mean, honestly, I think this True Grit is better than the original. I think they were more true to that.
The grit.
Yeah, yes. And then followed that up with Inside Llewyn Davis.
But I think one of the overarching themes for all their stuff, whether it's the dark comedy or the westerns or the more thriller type movies, is everyone's got high hopes and expectations, but low impulse. To the point that someone made a board game off of that like concept. Well, tabletop game, not really board game, with Fiasco. Same premise, like the game plays out like a Coen Brothers movie. And I think that's where you get a lot of the greatness from their movies. It's because these people get themselves into trouble, and we're there for the ride. Whether that's a comedy ride or, a thriller. I guess you'd call that No Country for Old Men a thriller.
Yeah, I think that's what the category would fit into.
But yeah, another brother team working with that.
They're another one, like, when I look, I did not realize the number. There was a lot of films on here that I had missed, that I did not realize, or that I knew about, that I didn't realize was them, or had forgotten was them at least. So that's pretty crazy.
And I think Oh Brother, Where Art Thou was the first movie to actually use color grading and not just use what they could capture on film stock.
Huh.
Yeah, which is now like a standard practice, but that was the first film to do that. Almost at the end. See who we got. One from your list, Tim Burton.
All right. Probably the most controversial director on this list. But I have to say, and what I said a few minutes ago about what I think about when I think about if I want to write something or if I'd want to shoot something. I do think about those other directors, but a general aesthetic that underlies all of it, that's always in the back of my mind, like firmly implanted. And probably the main reason why I became a goth kid is because I watched these films when I wasn't too young for them. They don't have like these hard adult themes or whatever, like Edward Scissorhands or Beetlejuice. It's one of those things too that as an adult I began to appreciate silent films, and I realized that he did too, so much so that a lot of his films you could watch without dialogue, and it's like a gateway drug. Like, these are films to get kids, I think, interested in cinema. That's what I think Tim Burton is. And when you're an adult, you might not appreciate them the same way. You might still love, I still love that original Batman with Michael Keaton. I still love Beetlejuice, and I still love Edward Scissorhands. They get a lot of shit. They get made fun of a lot. But I think there's even some merit to Pee-wee's, is it his Big Adventure?
Yeah,
or
his directorial debut.
I get the Pee-wee films, or the titles mixed up. And even going into like Sweeney Todd, like you either you get it or you don't. And I think it's a lot of people's guilty pleasure. I think there's a lot of people who are they're going to enjoy something, but they're not going to admit it because it'll get you made fun of. I don't mind make fun of. You're already going to be making fun of me anyway, so be my guest.
Yeah. I still love Beetlejuice. I still occasionally pop in his version of Sleepy Hollow, and
I think that's another one that's like seriously underrated.
Yeah, and I'm reluctantly excited for his Beetlejuice sequel.
I hope it's good.
Yeah.
I really do. He did a lot to push forward stop motion animation. A lot of other people are doing it more. I mean, because he didn't, let's be very clear, he didn't direct The Nightmare Before Christmas. That was Henry Selick, who also went on to do Coraline, and they've kind of taken over and really pushed that forward. He did direct Frankenweenie, which was originally a live-action short film that had Shelley Duvall in it. You know, I've never actually seen Planet of the Apes, his version of Planet of the Apes. I've always meant to go and watch it and see if it, like, what the deal was with that. If it was as bad as people say, or if it was just kind of subpar.
It's one of those, in a vacuum, having not watched the originals or even the newer remakes.
Right. It's just kind of in there by itself.
Yeah, it's okay. Not the greatest movie ever, not the worst. But when you're comparing it to the originals and the newer remakes, it's not good.
So, and I forgot he did do The Corpse Bride. So after, like, Sleepy Hollow, he did Planet of the Apes, entering into the new millennium. He did Big Fish, which I think it feels like an indie film made by Tim Burton, which also, like, well, less so than Ed Wood. Ed Wood really feels like an indie film made by Tim Burton. But Big Fish is like, it's an adaptation of a book about this guy who's trying to connect with his dad or reconcile his dad's life and deal with all the bullshit his dad put him through his life and figure out stuff about him. I think it's a lovely film and a nice story. Then he did Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Maybe the most divisive film he's ever made, because they did such a wildly different take from the original, and it's more so based on the book.
Yeah.
Even though it does diverge from even the book. It's just more in the spirit of it initially.
Yeah. I don't think it's better than the original, but I think that's the direction you had to go with this.
Right, because if you just remade the original, it still wouldn't have been good.
Yeah, I mean, you can't match Gene Wilder.
No, it's the situation you're in when you want to do something and you're doing a different take on a character that has existed, and it is already an iconic take. I think what most people would say is, why do it? I think he should not have done it. If I were advising him, I would say, go ahead and do The Corpse Bride early. Just don't do this one. Sweeney Todd's another one that, like, it has iconic takes, but those are all on Broadway.
Yeah.
And there have been cinematic versions made, but not as big a budget and not as widely known as this version, which was pretty true to the standard Broadway version that's been out there. They use the same songs songs, the same music. They got Sondheim on it. They just made it look like a Tim Burton film. But it's already kind of like perfect story for him to do that. It already existed for like 100+ years or something. Then it starts really going like somebody's pushing him off. He's out of ideas. The ideas that he goes from here seem less and less like his own, except for Frankenweenie, which was, I think, one of his own ideas. It's the guy Frankenstein's his own dog. And
wasn't it one that he did for film school or just out of film school?
Yeah, I think it was for Disney, and it was always like, I can't remember I think it's always included as an extra feature with like The Nightmare Before Christmas. I don't know why that is.
I think there's a fan theory now that the dog in Frankenweenie
is zero.
Zero, yeah.
I think, now that I'm thinking about it, it was probably because it was for Disney, so they owned it, so he would just always say release it on as a bonus feature. So we did Alice in Wonderland. People hate that. I mean, like, kids love it. I assume kids like that. It's for a certain type of person. If you just came out of Sleepy Hollow and, I don't know, Batman Returns, you're probably not going to go in thinking, I'm going to love Alice in Wonderland. Dark Shadows, yet again, it sounds like, right up his alley. Has he ever done a straight up vampire thing? No. So, doing that, which there's like vampires, witches, werewolves, all manner of, it's kind of like what Being Human did, but not as good as Being Human. Like, these people all live with each other.
I think that's why I didn't have him really on my list, or at least in my tops. I like his older work, for sure, but anymore, it just sounds like, let's take a existing concept and put a Tim Burton coat of paint on it.
And even then, the coat of paint isn't what it used to be.
Yeah.
Big Eyes, when he did this, I thought it was a good, like, get away from what you're doing typically to do a biopic about this woman. It's an interesting story, too, because her husband was taking credit for her paintings. It's serviceable. I'm glad the movie got made by someone, because it's a story that deserves to be told from, about Margaret Keane that brought her existence to a lot of people's attention. But when it really slams shut for me is Peregrine's, like Mrs. Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children, because I read those books. They're really good books. It kind of trails off at some point, but like, especially the first one, the idea is pretty good. It's like a more extreme, like if X-Men were all like extreme circus freaks and they're being hunted or whatever, it's crazy. And there's like time travel concepts in it. He took that and made it more of a fantasy. A lot of it looks pretty cool, beautiful, and some of it's right off the page. There's a fair amount that they changed, and definitely he knew he wasn't getting attached to doing a series of films. I knew exactly what they were going to do before the end of the film to make it sealed into one film, and that's exactly what they did. I knew he wasn't going to come back for it, and I knew somebody else wasn't taking over on it, because it wasn't treated like it was going to be a series of films like they did with so many other YA properties in the last 20 years. And it deserved to be. That's why I'm mad at Tim Burton, because he up any chance of, by the day he started negotiating to be the director on this one film, it solidified that we're not going to get this series of films. Even like his Dark Materials, they did that one film, and I think that was a pretty decent film, but it didn't do well. And then they ended up making it as a series, which worked a lot better for it. So at least that happened. I hope that could happen with Peregrines at some point. Maybe it could be a series, and the original author could advise or be a part of that team to have that get made in its entirety. And then Dumbo?
Yeah.
I'm curious, but I have, since 2019, it's been a while, it's like 5 years ago, I've refused to watch it. I'm like, I don't know why he did this. And
someone's like, here's some money. And he's like, okay.
Like, it seems like the least likely thing for him to do, and yet there it is.
That's what I'm hoping. Maybe we can get back on track with Beetlejuice. I like the character. The cast is there. We'll see. I'm sure we'll do a review about it in November.
Which I also think didn't he direct all of Wednesday? Which
I think so.
Crazy,
which Wednesday was fairly decent. I liked it.
Yeah. So there's that. Whatever. I know people are gonna hate on Tim Burton, and some of it is deserved, but some of it I think is dumb.
Yeah.
Like, they're gonna say, like, oh, did he get Johnny Depp back? And like, yo, you're the first person who thought of making that joke, and yet every one of your favorite directors, not you, I'm saying the dickhead who made that joke, they all work with the same people all the time. Because when you find people who you want to work like, oh, Wes Anderson, did he get like Yeoman to be his director of photography again? Yeah, he did, because he knows how to make his films for it. That's what you do. And if you ever become a filmmaker, you're gonna work with the same people all the time, because A, if you're friends with them, you're just going to enjoy making movies with them, and B, if you're a difficult dickhead that's hard to work with, you find somebody who knows how to deal with you, and then you continue doing that same thing that you do all the time. You think Christopher Nolan's like an easy guy to get along with? I doubt that.
Yeah. It's like, if you're just any job, if you work with the same group of people, it's just going to flow better because you know what to expect from each other.
Yeah, I've got people at work that if I had to pick a team, I'd pick the same people every time.
Yeah.
Now I know, like with a movie, it's like if you want it to be new and interesting or whatever, like you pick different actors to be in it. Well, guess the what? Johnny Depp's not in every single one of his films. Helena Bonham Carter's probably never gonna be in another one of his films. So there's been some movies he's made with an entirely new cast. That joke is old, worn out, and to be honest, never made sense. So anyway, let's move on to our final.
Yep.
Right.
Last but not least, and I don't even remember what it is, and I wrote it. Oh yeah, it's one of yours, Zach Braff.
Ah, okay. So you might want to edit this to not have him at the end, but maybe if they've made it this far, they'll be like, really? That one? So before I say this, I just want to say, like, Frank Darabont, who directed Shawshank Redemption, was on my honorable mentions list, and it's something that I thought about bringing up at some point to say, like, if you don't know anything else about what he's done, because he's not like a name up there like Scorsese or Steven Spielberg, but he directed this amazing film, The Shawshank Redemption. And that's kind of what Zach Braff is for me when, after I saw Garden State, like, I had this emotional connection to this movie. Like, I think a lot of people did. If you ended up seeing it, because it was such, like, a niche, like, indie film that is, I'm not going to say it's hard to watch, but it's like you're either going to connect with it and appreciate it on that level, or you might not. You might just let it pass you by. So given that, that's a lot, and he's like known more so for being an actor. Like he's acted in stuff more than he's directed.
Yeah, I think Scrubs, where most people would know him.
Right, yeah, Scrubs, and he has a podcast now, son of a bitch. So, he's competition. I have to kind of dog him a little bit. But he had I'm waiting, I feel like there is going to be a third film so there's Garden State, and then there's Garden State's like kind of spiritual successor. It is not a sequel to it, but it's called Wish I Was Here. I'm fairly certain no one listening will have seen this film. This will be the one film that like no one will have seen, and I just want him to be able to keep making films, because I think he's gonna get somewhere. It's like, this is the sort of thing where like Garden State is that like the best thing he's gonna do. We don't know. Is he gonna be able to make other things? He's on a podcast now. I want to see him be able to get to that point where he can make his Birds or his Psycho. Wish I Was Here, I feel like, is like a spiritual sequel to Garden State. It is not the same character, but it feels like it follows a certain thing. And he stars in it not completely as himself. Garden State was more so him. It's very autobiographical. Like he changes some things, but some of it I can't remember for certain, but I think in the beginning he's playing an actor. Like, that's how autobiographical it is. And he's working in a restaurant. And I think that maybe it was the same restaurant he was actually working in where he filmed a scene there. I can't remember if that's the case. If I'm wrong about that, don't come here for all of your behind the scenes knowledge. Is like vaguely remembered tidbits and things. That's yet another one where he had to go home because his mom died, and he's coming home for the funeral in the Garden State. So I think that there's got to be another one that he does to round out this a trilogy of films that does not exist and kind of only exists in my mind, that I'm hoping exists in Zach Braff's mind. His most recent thing that he directed, and he wasn't in this one, it was A Good Person. That's what it was called. Why am I not seeing it here? That one was with Florence Pugh. And so she plays the titular good person. I'm sorry, I was trying to find this here because it's not set up like in the way that it should be. So anyway, A Good Person is maybe like technically his best film, and that might be because he wasn't acting in it and could just solely focus on directing. I think they said he wrote it for his girlfriend at the time, which was Florence Pugh. They've since broken up, but that's behind the scenes drama that I don't really care about. He wanted to see her be able to act in something and be like really riveting and emotionally driven. It is what I call depression porn. It is devastating all the way through it, like Silver Linings Playbook or something, you know, like really hard to watch, but like gripping. What my dad would have called a tearjerker. Something that I try to not do, but I think I also do. So I understand like where, like how you can sit with that and let something like that come out of you and exist. So yeah, an odd choice. He's kind of all over the place with his career being, like I said, he's a podcaster. He's been in a lot of movies, not as many serious movies as well. I think he's more attuned to a comedy role. He's a natural comedian, not stand-up so far as I know, just a natural kind of clown that seems to just enjoy making people laugh with his physical comedy.
And I don't mean this in a derogatory terms, but he just has the face for comedy too. It lends itself better too.
Yeah, good looking guy, but there's something about him. You just see like he just wants to jump out at you and make you laugh and can easily make himself look funny. Scrubs, I think, was one of the best shows in the last 30 years. I think it rivals some of the other top shows that have been out there. I think it was highly overlooked because it's like primarily a comedy. I think that's actually incorrect. I think it's a dramedy. I think it's split down the middle. I think that the drama aspects of the show don't outweigh anything else. I think it balances the comedy
for sure
perfectly. I love that show. Even the stuff that I really didn't like about it are easily overlooked by the things that I love. And Zach Braff being the driving force behind it. Not, he wasn't the writer or creator or anything.
Didn't he become a producer in later seasons?
Yeah, I think he really pushed to help keep that on the air. And did direct, I think, at least just one episode. I remember listening to the commentary, and he had, for one shot, he had to have this huge piece of equipment to spin one of the giant cameras around. And everybody was like, why are you doing this to us? So, yeah, I know I said like Tim Burton might have been the most contentious pick. This might have actually been. But I also knew that you were going to cover certain people that I wasn't. Yeah. So I decided to swap out a few of mine that I would have had on the list, like the Coen brothers or even Scorsese. For a lesser known, I know he is not known for his directing, and I thought that I would put this out there for anybody who either doesn't know it or hasn't thought about it or maybe hasn't watched these movies in a while. Go back and check them out, see what you think. And I just want for certain people to be able to make more movies because he doesn't make enough. I think this might go somewhere. This could be something, but it won't if, he just keeps, maybe his place is in acting. Maybe that's where he needs to be. He just needs to be a good comedy, dramedy actor. I don't know, but I would love to see him round out Garden State and Wish I Was Here with a third film that kind of fits into that. I feel like it's in him. I feel like it's there. I could be wrong. He might view those films as totally disconnected, and I could be misreading that. Those are just my opinions. Those are just how I feel about it. And I think that's it.
Yeah. So yeah, that's our list of our 15 favorite directors. And again, this list is already the reason we did it the way we did it, because it's so fluid and would fluctuate. If we did this video again, it could be different. Because I know I had 20 people on my original list before I had to stop myself because I was already having enough time to narrow it down to 10.
Yeah, the list is flawed and incomplete, and there's so much more that we could have said about any. Yeah,
because even recording this, I'm like, man, maybe we should put that director in instead, because we didn't even mention Mel Brooks.
Oh, yeah. I just forgot.
Yeah.
That might have gone on mine. I might have switched out somebody. I might have taken out Zach Braff.
Yeah. Same here. I would have switched something, but...
It's been a long couple of weeks, and I had a difficult time, actually. Yeah. I was like, can I even think of 10 directors? Like, how the am I gonna do this? And I was like, oh yeah, I can think of 20. Like once I start, it just seemed like a daunting task because I hadn't compiled a list in a while.
Yeah, that's how I was. I thought the daunting task would be coming up with my 10. It became the daunting task to narrow it down to 10. And then we just skipped trying to rank them all together.
Yeah, that's the harder part is ranking them, because how do you even do that? I think anybody who tries,
it's like, how do you rank them? Do we go based on their capabilities? Do we go based on their catalog of films? Do we go based on our enjoyment levels, their critical responses?
Yeah, it has to kind of be any one of those things and just leave it at that.
So we just went with drawing it from a hat.
Yeah, I think that was our best bet for getting this done.
Yeah, or else we would still be working on this.
I think it went pretty well.
Yeah, so if you made it with us this far, thank you. Be sure to give us a like, subscribe, share with your friends. Let us know who your favorite directors are. Be sure to follow us on our social media. We are on Facebook and Instagram. We'll leave links in the description below. And until next time, see ya.